The movie kicks off by showing some Italian fishermen chilling on their boat in the Mediterranean Sea. They're having a good time, playing cards, and having a few drinks. But then one of them tosses some trash into the sea and spots a body floating out there. They all rush to check it out, thinking the guy's done for. Turns out he's still alive but has a bunch of gunshot wounds on his back. One of the fishermen, named Giancarlo, goes to work and takes out all the bullets from the guy's body. Then, surprise, they find a chip inside the guy that's lighting up with some secret Swiss bank account code. Later on, Giancarlo goes back to see the mysterious guy, Jason Bourne, but he's nowhere to be found. Suddenly, Jason jumps out and starts asking questions. Giancarlo tells him they found him adrift at sea and saved him. Jason doesn't remember a thing though, so Giancarlo's curious about who this guy really is. After a while, the fishing boat made it to the shore. Giancarlo, feeling bad for Jason, gave him some money to help figure out who he really was using the info from that Swiss bank account chip. So, Jason arrived in Switzerland, wandered around, and pondered his true identity. Then, out of the blue, two cops showed up while it was getting dark. They asked Jason to prove who he was. Jason mentioned he had amnesia, but those cops tried to arrest him. Jason turned out to be quite skilled in martial arts and managed to fend off the officers, leaving them stunned. Meanwhile, over at the CIA, the top officials were having a meeting about a failed plan to bump off an ex-president named Nikwana Wombozi. This guy had claimed in a video that the CIA was out to get him, so they were looking into it. None of the top CIA officials were owning up to the plan, but Ward Abbott, one of the top officials, pulled aside his underling, Alexander Conklin, for a chat. Conklin eventually admitted that they had tried to off the ex-president without Abbott's green light, and things went south when their agent went missing. Now, Conklin was trying to clean up the mess. The next day, Jason found himself in a Swiss bank, showing off the bank account number he found on that chip of his. It was no ordinary visit, as they took him to a special room with tight security. He had to scan his fingerprints just to access his deposit box. After a wait, the bank handed over a box with multiple passports and a stash of money in different currencies. Jason grabbed everything and headed to the American embassy. So Jason showed up at the embassy, hoping to get some protection by flashing one of his passports. But things got hairy when the guards tried to nab him, so he had to pull a quick one to give him the slip. He tried to climb up the building and onto the roof, but his bag took a tumble, forcing him to do a little wall scaling action to shake off the embassy security. After escaping that mess, Jason hit the road and needed a ride. That's when he spotted Marie Kreutz, a young woman with some money woes, grumbling by her car. Jason asked her if she'd take him to an address in Paris for 20,000 bucks. Marie happily agreed, and they hopped in her old car. Meanwhile, Conklin got wind that Jason was still kicking and hanging out with a lady. So he had his crew score every surveillance camera in Switzerland to figure out who this lady was and where they were headed next. Finally, Conklin got the lowdown on the two and decided to call in a contract killer to deal with Jason. Jason and Marie were in Paris, and he decided to invite her over to his apartment, thanks to some info from the bank records. He was hoping to uncover her real identity, but sadly, he came up empty-handed. He also checked his last phone call, which led him to a hotel, and using a different identity, he asked about a guest named Ken, who supposedly bit the dust in an accident 2 weeks back. But the whole situation had Jason feeling a little off, so he hung up the phone in a hurry. Out of the blue, a hitman, sent by Conklin, comes crashing in through the apartment window from the roof, looking for a piece of Jason. Marie, understandably scared, takes cover, while Jason does his best to fend off the assassin. Eventually, he manages to immobilize the guy. Jason, curious as ever, asks who sent this guy, but the hitman didn't want to open his mouth at all. Meanwhile, Marie digs through the hitman's bag and finds weapons, Jason's personal info, and her own details, cluing her in that she's a target too. She's all jittery, but Jason tries to soothe her nerves. Sneakily, the hitman tries to get back on his feet, but takes a tumble from the top floor, determined not to give away any information. Jason and Marie had to make a quick exit from the apartment because they didn't want any trouble. Just their luck, a bunch of cops showed up after some guy took a tumble from an apartment. The cops got suspicious, seeing Jason and Marie scurrying away, and they were all set to grill them. But Jason and Marie hopped into their car and got a police tail. Jason, though, had some slick driving moves up his sleeve and managed to outfox the pursuing cops. They stashed Marie's car away after realizing the police had it on their radar, making sure there were no fingerprints left behind. Later on, the police did find Marie's car, but it was as clean as a whistle. No clues for them to track down Jason and Marie, who were kicking it at a hotel. To throw the cops off their scent, Jason even helped Marie cut her long hair. It brought them closer together, and they ended up having a good time that night. The hitman, known as the Professor, got a gig from Conklin to take out Wombosi and Jason. The next day, the Professor set up on a rooftop with his sniper, taking aim at Wombosi's place. When he spotted his target through a window, he wasted no time, squeezing the trigger and taking Wombosi down. The Professor packed up and got ready for his next hit, which happened to be Jason. Meanwhile, Ward got wind of Wombosi's home tragedy and was all riled up. He rushed to meet Conklin for the lowdown, but Conklin casually fibbed, pointing the finger at Jason, who he claimed he sent 2 weeks back to finish off Wombosi. It was his sly way of making his superiors think the mission was a success, and Ward seemed to buy into Conklin's explanation. Jason, still in Paris, got word about Wombosi's death, and it piqued his curiosity. He wanted to confirm the news, so he headed over to Wombosi's place, where journalists and cops were swarming around the scene. Once he verified that wasn't some made-up story, Jason and Marie planned to head back to their hotel. But they spotted lots of police near the hotel, and it seemed like their location was no longer a secret. To dodge the heat, Jason and Marie decided to hop off in the middle of the road and not go back to the hotel. The next day, Marie took Jason to an empty house that belonged to her half-brother, Heman, on the outskirts of town. When they got there, it looked like Eamon had been keeping the place up, so they figured he might be living there again. Before long, Eamon showed up, and Marie asked him if they could crash at the house for a while. Eamon didn't seem to have any issues with that. That night, when everyone was snoozing away, Jason woke up and glanced at Eamon's kids, all sound asleep. But he couldn't help but worry about the little one because his presence in the house put the child at risk. Next morning, while having breakfast with Jason and Marie, Eamon mentioned that his dog had mysteriously disappeared. This set off alarm bells for Jason, who immediately asked Eamon and someone else to hide in the basement. He suspected another assassin was onto him. Once he made sure everyone was tucked away, Jason borrowed Eamon's gun to confront the hitman out to get him. He had a plan. He blew up an oil tank near Eamon's house to create a distraction and lure the Professor, the hitman, closer. The plan worked like a charm, and the Professor followed Jason to a weedy field. From behind those weeds, Jason tried to figure out where the hitman was hiding. When the Professor let his guard down, Jason sneaked up and took him out. Unfortunately, he couldn't get any info on who had hired the Professor because the hitman bled to death. After a while, Jason went back to Eamon's place and urged everyone, including Marie, to leave the area so they could start fresh with the money he had. Marie was hesitant, but Jason tried to convince her, saying they had to find a solution without putting others in danger. Eventually, Marie, along with Eamon and his children, reluctantly left the house. Meanwhile, Jason, still curious about his true identity, rifled through the Professor's bag that he had taken after the hitman's demise. In the bag, he discovered the Professor's cell phone and noticed the last call was to Conklin. Without a second thought, Jason dialed the number from the Professor's phone and told Conklin to meet him alone on a bridge at 5 p.m. After delivering his message, Jason promptly hung up. Later on, Jason headed to the bridge as planned, but he quickly realized that Conklin had tried to trick him by bringing his team along. So, Jason contacted Conklin again, canceled the meeting, and slyly attached a tracking device to their car. As Conklin and his team drove away, Jason easily tracked them and followed them into a building. Using his skills, Jason infiltrated the building and switched off the lights, causing Conklin to search through several rooms. Eventually, Conklin came face to face with Jason, who had a gun pointed at him. Conklin realized that Jason had amnesia when the young man questioned why Conklin was pursuing him. Conklin began to explain that Jason had once been his subordinate and had been tasked with eliminating Wombosi, the former African president who was on a yacht. Listening to Conklin's story, Jason started to recall some events on the yacht. He remembered being on the verge of killing Wombosi, but when the president's young daughter appeared, he couldn't go through with it. Unfortunately, Wombosi's men discovered Jason's location, shot him in the back, and tossed his body into the sea. Conklin revealed that he had been searching for Jason with the intention of bringing him back to his team. However, Jason, knowing he used to be a contract killer, declined Conklin's offer and knocked him out cold. As Jason was getting ready to leave the room, Conklin's men suddenly launched an attack, and he had to confront all of them. After a fierce struggle, Jason managed to escape. Meanwhile, Conklin, who had regained consciousness, was shocked to find that all his men had been defeated by Jason. He decided to leave that place. On a quiet street, Mannheim, who worked under Ward, appeared and fatally shot Conklin as per Ward's orders. Ward was upset with Conklin for causing trouble due to the failed mission to eliminate Wombosi. In the film's closing scene, Jason reunited with Marie, who had moved to a house by the coast. The moral lesson from the story teaches us that showing kindness and helping others, even in difficult situations, can lead to unexpected alliances and help us rediscover our own identity and purpose.